Thank you for joining us for this special series of This is Getting Old. Sponsored by the Health and Aging Policy Fellows Program, Capstone Conversations is brought to you by Melissa B., PhD, in collaboration with the George Washington University's Center for Aging, Health, and Humanities.
Welcome to This is Getting Old. I'm your host, Melissa Batchelor, and today we're going to be talking about senior nutrition, and I'm joined by Health and Aging Policy Fellow Marie Gualtieri and her discussant, Liz Albertine. And so welcome, both of you, to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much. Great to be here.
So let's start with introductions. So Marie, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, and then Liz can do the same.
Yeah, sure. So, hi, I'm Marie Gualtieri. I'm a sociologist whose passion is to ensure that vulnerable populations have access to food and the nutrition support that they need. And for the past decade, I've worked with community-based organizations, health providers, and foundations to learn really the lived experiences of food insecurity. And among older adults, what I learned is that they have unique challenges to food access, which we'll talk about today. But overall, I just really want to make an impact, and I really find joy in taking those lived experiences and making those and translating those into meaningful change. And knowing that I wanted to have an impact, it was actually Lynn Frist-Feinberg who told me about the Health and Aging Policy Fellows Program. And so I had to finish my training, so I had to wait 4 years to apply to the program, but I'm just so grateful for this opportunity, and I've had such a remarkable experience working for Congresswoman DeLauro, and I really wanted to work for her specifically because I read her book, The Least Among Us, Waging the Battle for the Vulnerable, because I could just tell that she was very much about the people, and I just found it very motivating. And she has such an amazing staff. They've been truly wonderful, and they have such a great reputation on the Hill. And Liz joins us today, the legislative director, so I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thanks, Marie. I'm Liz Albertine. I'm Rosa DeLauro's legislative director. I've been with her for about 10 years with a focus on labor policy and appropriations. She's chair of the subcommittee of Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education. She was also former chair of the Ag subcommittee, which is directly related to Marie's work and her interest in our office. I also run the fellowship program, and I'm Marie's supervisor.
Okay, great. And a little shout out to NC State. I was telling Liz before you came on that we've got 2 family members that are Wolfies and another nephew starting there. And then Liz and I, she's from Fredericksburg and I was born there. So lots of interesting connections. And now we're both in Fairfax. So talk to me a little bit about what food insecurity is. Like, what does that term mean? And what did food insecurity mean for older adults before COVID?
Yeah, sure. So food insecurity is basically the social and economic factors that relates to someone's household experience in terms of accessing food and the availability of food that they have to them. It's different from hunger. The USDA will kind of separate out the 2 terms because hunger is more about a physiological feeling, right? But food insecurity is when you don't have some sort of means to access food. And so for older adults, in 2018, which is the most recent data that we have, approximately 5.3 million Americans 60 and older were food insecure, and that's about 7.3% of the senior population at the time, with millions more at risk for food insecurity. And when you factor in the at-risk population, that number increases to about 10 million. And there are a few root causes to food insecurity. And so there's income, right? So we know that poverty and food insecurity rates are positively correlated, meaning as one increases, the other increases as well. And during the Great Recession, we saw this, where it was at a record high. And in 2011, when we saw conditions improving and the food insecurity and poverty rates decreasing among the general population, for older adults, it still remained high. But why is that, right? And that's because income isn't the sole driver of food insecurity for older adults, because they also have issues with transportation and physical mobility, and also waiting lists. And for waiting lists, the Government Accountability Office this year in January released a report on senior nutrition programs, citing that some communities had as many as 12,000 older adults waiting for meal services. And when I found out about these waiting lists while working on an evaluation project several years ago, I was hooked, right? How do these older adults get the food that they have if they're in need of this resource but can't because they're waiting? And something that, you know, the older adults kept telling me when I was interviewing them was, I just want someone to hear my story. And I said, I promise you, people will hear your story. So I think of Adeline, who is 93, who rolled up the sleeves of her pink floral bathrobe to show me the burn marks she sustained while trying to boil water. And I think of Robert, who was in his 60s, who was eating cat food because it's less expensive than tuna fish. And I think of Marcy, who was really afraid to cook on the stove because she had oxygen. And so she would remove her oxygen to cook. And so it was very difficult for her to breathe while even trying to prepare meals for herself. And so it's those stories that really resonate with me and continue to motivate me to contribute to change. And so that's kind of in a nutshell, the experiences of food insecurity among older adults before COVID.
Okay, and so then how has COVID impacted that?
Yeah, so a lot. And so
as with everything.
Right. So we've seen this shift in organizational efforts because, you know, congregate meal programs had to revamp their services to offer things like to-go meals or even home-delivered meals. So they really had to convert their services. And we've seen an increase in demand. So Meals on Wheels America actually came out with a report in May of this year. And what they did was take kind of a snapshot of what their services were like before March 1st and afterwards. And what they saw was that 89% of their programs, which is about 5,000 programs across the country, about 89% of them saw an increase in meal requests. And not just like a little bit of an increase, like a very substantial increase, where 79% of those programs we're seeing a double increase,
Wow.
a twofold increase in meal requests. And the waiting list, which we know existed before COVID, saw an increase of 26%. So just think about, you know, that GAO report that I talked about before with 12,000 older adults waiting for services. Even waiting lists like that have increased. And aside from funding, a majority of the programs find it difficult to obtain PPE so that their staff and those they're delivering to can remain safe. So we've seen also an issue with capacity. So these organizations really rely on volunteers, but those volunteers are older adults themselves. So with the pandemic, because older adults are more likely to contract COVID-19, they've seen a decrease in volunteers, but an increase in demand. So they really are in a tight spot where, you know, these are when they need, you know, volunteers the most. And we don't have all the data yet, but food advocacy groups predict that the pandemic's impact on food insecurity will be worse than that of the Great Recession, just given what they're seeing with the increase in demand, what they're seeing boots on the ground with the services, and through preliminary data that's rolling in.
Okay, so now let's shift a little bit. And how did you take kind of your interests and determine what placement you wanted to have, and then what are some of the things that you worked on?
Yeah, so a lot of meetings with constituents and advocacy groups to really get a pulse on the issues. So when you're responding to a crisis, having that boots on the ground perspective of what's going on and what needs to be done, where you know, we need to put our efforts is really important. So it was really great to hear from constituents and advocacy groups on those issues. And I monitored the issues for senior nutrition for the Families First and CARES Acts. And then I became staff lead for the House Passed HEROES Act. And that included briefing the Congresswoman and also tracking appropriations funds for the subcommittee. And we've made a lot of wins. So emergency funding for Older Americans Act Title III nutrition programs, that was $750 million from Families First and the CARES Act, with additional funding from the House passed HEROES Act. We saw a SNAP boost of 15%, and raising the minimum benefit from $16 to $30 in the House passed HEROES Act, as well as blocking administration rules to reduce SNAP benefits. And overall, while we wish that COVID was not here, right? I think we can all agree on that. I do think back to those interviews that I had with older adults and promising them that their stories would be heard, and being able to hear from constituents and advocacy groups who are experiencing this crisis, and taking into account those older adults, and being able to speak to the Congresswoman directly about these issues and discuss them. It's just, I don't know, it's truly a moment and experience for me.
Okay. So what do you think was one of the most significant things about your fellowship this past year, both for you and for Liz also?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, going into the fellowship, I thought, okay, this is an election year, so how is that going to contribute to my experience as a fellow? And then coronavirus happened, right? And it really was all hands on deck. How do we respond to this crisis? So it truly did change what I was working on. But I mean, throughout, I've been able to really learn about the different policy vehicles, and that's from the amazing staff in the office taking me under their wing. And so for me, it's truly been a highlight to learn about these different vehicles of policy, and to be here in a time where it's just so pivotal for older adults right now, right, with coronavirus. And we think about, not only with food insecurity, but nursing homes and access to, telemedicine and health disparities. And really, I think that even though this isn't the year that I predicted coming in, I do think that it is the year to be a health and aging policy fellow.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. I can't emphasize enough how critical Marie has been in a pandemic nobody really foresaw. I especially didn't. Maybe if you're an infectious disease expert, you knew it was coming. So it has just been, you can sense Marie's passion, and also her expertise was so valued and needed. We have 4 legislative staff that are, that I manage. And so having Marie come in, at a time where we're dealing with trillions of dollars and figuring out where things need to go, her expertise really shined through. So I'll just say COVID was definitely, I think, top of the list for the fellowship year.
Yeah, it's changed a lot of things. So, and I do think that one of the things that the pandemic has brought to light are a lot of these issues and how they impact older adults. And so I hope that this podcast series can kind of help to continue to elevate that, because there's still a lot of things that need to be fixed. So speaking of things that still need to be done, Marie, what do you think your next steps will be? Is your fellowship like totally over, or do you have a couple of more weeks or something?
Yeah, so while the fellowship typically ends towards the end of September, I was actually granted an extension until December 31st. So I'm very grateful for that. And I'm just very excited in terms of what this fellowship has been able to do for me. Like I talked about before with the different policy vehicles and learning the inner workings of policy, this fellowship really gave me access to that. And I've been able to develop a new skill set and knowledge to where I can move policy forward. And when I have an idea, I know what policy vehicle to use. Like, not every idea is a bill, not everything is about funding, but sometimes it can be report language or an amendment or a letter to an agency or something else. And I've been able to really learn about those different processes through my time in the office, from having such great mentors such as Liz and others in the office who I can't even stress how amazing they are, really. I mean, I'm in awe of them every single day. They are amazing. And so because I have this new skill set and knowledge, it's actually opened a lot of doors for me in terms of what my next steps would potentially be. And I just think that that's really exciting, and doors that wouldn't necessarily be opened without my fellowship experience. So I'm entirely grateful for this opportunity, and definitely I would love to thank Congresswoman DeLauro for, one, just being her, but also for her leadership, and the staff in the office. Like I said, they are amazing. And I would also like to take this time to thank Harold and Kathy, who are the directors of the program, for this transformative experience and opportunity. And Misha, Brigitte, and Victoria of the National Program Office, I really enjoyed working with them this year. My fellow fellows and the alumni network, such as you, Melissa, who have been so great. And it's just really wonderful to be part of a network of just good people doing great things in the field of aging. And I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the John A. Hartford Foundation, West Health, and Atlantic Philanthropies, who fund the fellowship. So without them, this experience wouldn't have been possible. So I'm just really thankful for all of them.
And John Bielenson and Chris Gers at SCP.
Because
this is a chance to highlight all of those skills.
I know, and they're terrific. I love them, and they're just so great at what they do. So I really love to learn from them this year too, which was really great.
Okay. So any other final words or like anything else that we need to talk about or say?
I think we're all good.
Okay. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining me today and talking about senior nutrition and highlighting some of the issues that we're seeing more pronounced during the pandemic, but we're going to continue to see them as the number of older adults increase over the next 10 to 20 years. So thank you both, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Great job, Marie.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this special series of This Is Getting Old. Sponsored by the Health and Aging Policy Fellows Program, Capstone Conversations is brought to you by Melissa B., PhD, in collaboration with the George Washington University's Center for Aging, Health, and Humanities. Thank you for joining me today for This Is Getting Old. If you'd like to know more, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, and if you have any questions or a related topic you'd like to hear from me about, just let me know. Thanks.